morning. Welcome to NTD News. I'm Stephanie Cox. Here are today's top stories. A new poll shows that law and order is what Americans are most concerned about in the upcoming election. This as riots and looting erupt across the country. We look at which candidate has an early lead in the poll. And Joe Biden in Pittsburgh delivering remarks on the violence. He spoke out against accusations that he's been slow to denounce lawlessness and destruction in U.S. cities. The academic year is around the corner, and protesters in Boston are calling for their state government to repeal a school vaccine requirement. They say the government is overstepping its boundaries. And some New York legislators are pushing for ballot drop boxes to come to the state. They say it will help restore voters' confidence in absentee ballots after the problems they posed during the primary elections. Israel and the United Arab Emirates work on formalizing relations. The first step, a historic flight directly from Israel to the UAE. And massive protests broke out over the weekend in Inner Mongolia over a move by Beijing. Some are calling Beijing's move cultural genocide. Press Secretary Kayleigh McEnany calls on Democratic leaders to step up to secure their streets. Following many days of violence in numerous cities, she urged governors and leaders to invite federal law enforcement.
Earlier today, Press Secretary Kayleigh McEnany spoke of the recent violence as she called on Democrat leaders to step up. In particular, she pointed to increasing unrest in Democratic-run cities, Washington, D.C., New York, Seattle, Portland, Minneapolis, and Kenosha. McEnany reiterated that federal law enforcement stands ready, but that police power, the power to regulate order, is with the states.
So we want to work collaboratively with Democrat mayors and governors. They, after all, do hold the police power as embedded in the Constitution to control their streets, but we, as a federal government, are willing to supplement.
On August 28th, Portland Mayor Ted Wheeler rejected help from federal law enforcement, saying no thanks and stay away, please. The next day, a man was shot dead. The suspected killer is Michael Reinl, who calls himself 100% Antifa. Since May, the DOJ has made 100 federal arrests in Portland. 74 people are facing federal charges. Portland officials arrested 29 people on Sunday after rocks, eggs, and other objects were thrown at police officers. In Wisconsin, following the Kenosha riots, 175 people have been arrested as of August 30th. Wisconsin's Governor Tony Evers requested federal support on August 26th to help stop the violence. Close to 1,000 National Guard troops and 200 DOJ personnel were deployed to Kenosha. Evers is now asking President Trump to reconsider his visit to Kenosha, which is scheduled for tomorrow.
I am concerned your presence will only hinder our healing. I am concerned your presence will only delay our work to overcome division and move forward together.
President Trump is still set to visit Kenosha on Tuesday.
7 Kenosha County Board supervisors wrote a letter to Trump asking him not to cancel a visit. They say many Kenoshans are grateful for the federal assistance. They wrote that they look to Trump's leadership in this time of crisis. And a new Democracy Institute poll shows President Trump holds a 3-point lead over his contender Joe Biden. The poll shows Trump's lead in key swing states is even larger at 7 points. Law and order tops the list of important issues in the poll, with the economy coming in second. Our reporter Kevin Hogan has more on the results.
Anti-police protests and violent riots have rocked U.S. cities for the last several months. According to a recent poll, this is one issue Americans are taking very seriously when deciding who will be their next president. The Democracy Institute polled 1,500 Americans and found the most important issue is law and order at 37%, with the economy second at 27%. The poll found that President Trump leads Biden by 3% of the popular vote nationwide, and even more so in key swing states like Florida, Iowa, and Michigan. The president has taken a hard stance in support of law and order throughout the recent unrest. He's set himself apart as the law and order candidate by denouncing Antifa, sending the National Guard to Kenosha, and for criticizing Portland's mayor for not letting the National Guard intervene there.
I'm telling you, if only
Biden has denounced the violence on a few occasions in past months. In late July, he denounced arsonists and anarchists, saying local law enforcement should stop them. On Monday, Joe Biden wrote on Twitter that he wants an America safe from crime and looting. Nearly 2/3 of people polled said Biden has not been sufficiently critical of the violent rioting. Patrick Basham, the director of the Democracy Institute, says the poll confirms that Democrats misread the effect of Black Lives Matter protests and Americans' desire to restore law and order in the wake of riots and anarchic protests. Basham says when Biden condemned the violence in Kenosha, that marked a shift in his stance. He says Biden made this move because his campaign's internal polling revealed that Americans are opposed to organized anarchy, including looting and vandalism. Former U.S. Navy SEAL and Texas Representative Dan Crenshaw criticized Biden for dragging his feet. He wrote, "Too little too late. The left-wing militants have been at war in America's cities for months, and you're only commenting now because the polling told you to." The poll showed more people think Trump will do a better job standing up to China than Biden. The National Intelligence Director said China prefers that Trump lose the election. Each party's national convention inspired more voters to vote for each candidate. Yet the RNC had a greater impact, with 21% positively influenced to vote for Trump compared to a slim 8% for Biden. Kevin Hogan, NTD News.
Presidential nominee Joe Biden visited Pittsburgh today to address the violent riots sweeping the nation. He refuted claims that he has been slow to condemn leftist violence, and he also denied that he would empower those same radicals if he were elected in November. NTD's Kevin Hogan has more.
Joe Biden publicly denounced the violence taking place during the riots that have stemmed from anti-police, Black Lives Matter, and anarchistic protests since George Floyd's death.
I want to make it absolutely clear, something very clear about all of this. Rioting is not protesting. Looting is not protesting. Setting fires is not protesting. None of this is protesting. It's lawlessness, plain and simple.
Biden's statement comes as Republicans have criticized him for being slow to condemn the recent violence in many U.S. cities. President Trump responded to Biden's remarks on Twitter. He wrote that Biden's blaming the police far more than he's blaming the rioters, anarchists, agitators, and looters, which he could never blame or he would lose the radical left Bernie supports.
You know me. You know my heart. You know my story, my family story. Ask yourself, do I look like a radical socialist with a soft spot for rioters? Really?
Clashes between anti-police protesters and pro-Trump groups have broken out in Portland. On Saturday, a member of the Patriot Prayer Caravan was allegedly shot and killed by a radical who referred to himself as 100% Antifa on social media. Biden called on Americans to do better than continuing the violence.
When I think of the presidency, I don't think about myself. It isn't about my brand. It's about you, the American people. We can do better, and we have to do better. And I promise you this, we will do better.
The suspected Portland shooter was cited in early July at one of the city's protests on allegations of having a loaded gun in a public space and resisting arrest. Court documents do not indicate why the allegations were dropped later that month. He spent no time behind bars. Now he is under investigation for the fatal shooting. Kevin Hogan, NTD News.
Since 1992, California has been a blue state. But over the weekend in Silicon Valley, a community of Trump supporters turned out in red, white, and blue, hoping to turn the state red again. Our San Francisco team talked to some of the people at the rally.
Cindy Sharon of California said she used to be a one-man marching band in her support of then-candidate Trump. Now she's joined by a diverse and growing community, including Vietnamese for Trump and Chinese for Trump, banding together to form a rally. She says for too long, people haven't been able to express what they really thought, but now things have changed.
Now we have a president that is speaking for us, and it's emboldening other Americans to be able to speak their truth, what they feel is comfortable, what they feel they really need.
Jared Ring started a website called Californians for Trump to give people a space to share their views.
My whole goal was to get rallies like this in California to let people know that we're not all Biden supporters, and it's okay to be a Trump supporter.
This supporter, who wanted to stay anonymous, says there is a change of thinking beginning in California.
With all these riots, burning, chaos, and all of that, I think that a lot of people will have a change of mind as to who they're going to be voting for.
This supporter wants California to regain its law and order and freedom of speech. To her, this is what re-electing Donald Trump represents.
People who would like our state back, our state to be again free, to have a freedom of speech back, hopefully one day, and everybody would be again happy and not suppressed. Nobody's voices would be suppressed.
Biden is leading the polls in California, but this crowd is confident that those who have stayed quiet will make themselves heard at the voting booth. Reporting by Grace Coulter, NTD News.
In Boston, Massachusetts, people went out to protest a new vaccine requirement from their state government. Some of them are saying the mandate is unconstitutional and that the choice of whether a child should be vaccinated should be up to the parent.
Outside the Massachusetts State House, protesters carried signs and chanted together in opposition to the vaccine mandate.
Freedom! Freedom! Freedom!
The protesters are concerned that the government is using power outside of its jurisdiction. Some of them argue many of the vaccines have not gone through proper quality control. They also say it violates their constitutional rights.
First of all, it's a constitutional issue. Our bodies are our first piece of property, and to mandate what that we put into our bodies is just wrong fundamentally, runs contrary to the Constitution.
The policy, which was announced on August 18th, requires any child over 6 months who is attending preschool, school, or college to get the vaccine. According to the state's health department, the requirement is an important step to reduce flu-related illness and the overall impact of respiratory illness during the virus pandemic. Protesters, however, believe the government shouldn't have control over the matter.
I think you should leave it up to the parents. Let the parents make the decision of what they want to do with their child, because they're the ones that knows what's best for their child. They birthed them, they had them, they know what's best for them. It's nowhere for the government to come in and mandate you get a flu shot for your child.
Kids that are homeschooled and college students learning off campus are exempt from the mandate. Students will be expected to get the vaccine by December 31st for the 2020 to 2021 influenza season.
Israeli and U.S. officials took a historic flight today to formalize relations between Israel and the United Arab Emirates. The peace deal is the first of its kind between an Arab country and Israel in over 20 years.
High-ranking American and Israeli delegates are making history in the first ever direct flight from Israel to the United Arab Emirates. It marks the normalization of relations between the two countries.
I prayed yesterday at the wall that Muslims and Arabs from throughout the world will be watching this flight, recognizing that we are all children of God and that the future does not have to be predetermined by the past.
Israel and the UAE announced on August 13th they would forge official ties under a deal brokered by President Trump. The Abraham Accord reshapes the Middle East order, from the Palestinian issue to relations with Iran.
This is a land steeped in history, but so many of the dates that we think of in the history are dates relating to battles or conquest. Today is a historic date that relates to peace. And these Abraham Accords are going to be remembered for many, many years to come.
On Saturday, the UAE announced it was dropping its economic boycott against Israel, departing from the Arab League policy of linking official relations with Israel to achievement of Palestinian statehood. The Trump administration has been trying to encourage other Sunni Arab countries that share Israel's fears of Iran to join in a regional push for peace. Officials from Israel and the UAE have said they are looking at cooperation in defense, medicine, agriculture, tourism, and technology.
Up next, New York City Mayor Bill de Blasio postpones sending out tens of thousands of pink slips to city workers. And he asks lawmakers for more funding to avoid sending workers home. And New York senators proposed a bill to bring ballot drop boxes to the state. It's meant to be an alternative to mail-in voting. More on that when we return.
When you look at TV networks in America, a soundbite and fight-it-out culture prevails on news and commentary programs. As a Canadian, I'm fascinated with America, and I wanted to offer American thought leaders an opportunity to share their thoughts in a deep dive format where we can explore their ideas together. And so American Thought Leaders was born. The world's most brilliant thinkers believed that open discourse was the key to greatness. However, all around the world, we see that discourse is being stifled, and political agendas have subverted media. The Epoch Times launched its Global Thought Leaders program to bring back this great tradition of free thought. As the host of American Thought Leaders, every week I interview some of the most intriguing minds on the most pressing issues of our time. Be sure to check out our new episodes every week.
In New York City, tens of thousands of government workers were expected to get layoff notices, but to their relief, the mayor delayed sending out those pink slips. He asked lawmakers to come up with a solution to balance the city's tight budget. NTD's Miguel Moreno has more on that.
Mayor Bill de Blasio has warned for months that he'll have to lay off city workers if the state or federal government doesn't give him an extra $1 billion in funding. The mayor delayed sending out 22,000 pink slips to city workers on Monday.
We won't send off the layoff notices today, but each day we will reassess because we have to address our fiscal crisis. Again, no one wants to see a single layoff.
But he's asking city unions and lawmakers to figure something out, like support long-term borrowing. This would give the city more power to borrow money, debts that could carry over to the next administration. De Blasio says some unions support the idea, but according to a Daily News report, other unions say they'd rather explore alternatives like incentivizing retirement-eligible workers to retire early. As for the current budget, de Blasio's been criticized for allotting nearly $2 million to his wife's staff members. That's according to the New York Post, which says a $117,000 a year speechwriter and a $150,000 a year senior advisor work for her. The senior advisor was hired after de Blasio announced a hiring freeze in April due to the budget crisis. We reached out to the mayor's office to comment on potential cuts he could make to retain city workers, but they didn't immediately get back to us. Both de Blasio and Governor Cuomo have asked the federal government for more funding. Miguel Moreno, NTD News, New York.
New York senators introduced legislation that would allow the Board of Elections to place ballot drop boxes around the state. The move comes as some Democrats have accused the post office director of colluding with President Trump to undermine the presidential election. NTD's Melina Wisecup has more on the ballot box controversy.
State Senator Brad Hoylman authored the proposed legislation to place these in convenient places like libraries and banks. The senator says the drop box is meant to give voters confidence that their vote is counted, since ballot problems with New York City's primary elections may have deterred voters from trusting the mail-in method.
Up to 20% of absentee ballots were invalidated because they arrived late, they didn't have the proper postmark, and other issues with the U.S. mail.
He and other Democrats have accused Postmaster Louis DeJoy of working with President Trump to sabotage the Postal Service, to skew the election results. The claim, DeJoy ordered postal workers to remove mail collection boxes.
With a flatbed truck and 2 post boxes on it, moving down Broadway. The Postmaster General had ordered them removed.
It's a claim DeJoy denies. When he testified before the Senate, he labeled it a false narrative, perpetuated by some media and elected officials.
When every accusation you made, other than the truck, adhere to the truck schedule, is inaccurate and more misinformation for the American public.
Drop boxes allow voters' ballots to bypass the postal services and go straight to the Board of Elections. 33 other states are already using them, and Virginia's General Assembly just voted over the weekend to create ballot drop boxes. President Trump has criticized the drop box, claiming they make it possible for a person to vote multiple times. However, the New York officials claim they're secure, since they can be locked and the design seems to protect against people fishing out ballots.
Still to come, massive protests broke out over the weekend in Inner Mongolia. This after a leaked secret order from Beijing, which some are calling a sign of cultural genocide. And the Czech Republic's second highest official is in Taiwan on a 6-day visit against China's will. The Czech official called on Taiwan to defend its freedom and said democratic countries should support each other. Find out more when we return.
We are being censored. America's news outlets no longer provide the truth. 90% of news outlets in the United States are controlled by 6 corporations. They're not out to tell you the truth of what's happening. They're out to tell you the picture of the world that they represent. The mission of the Epoch Times is to chase the truth, to ground all statements in facts, and prevent people from being misled. The Epoch Times is independent. We're not controlled by any special interests, and we never will be. The Epoch Times is a non-partisan media. That means we don't stand for any political party. This is a battle between truth and deceit, a battle between forces that would ensnare this country in ignorance, and between a media that wants to present you with the truth. Subscribe today and join the Americans who are seeking truth and tradition. We'd love to have you on board.
Massive protests broke out over the weekend in China's autonomous Inner Mongolia region. Unrest erupted after a move by Beijing that some are calling a new round of cultural genocide. NTD's Tiffany Meyer brings us more.
Massive protests broke out in the Chinese autonomous region of Inner Mongolia over the weekend. It was against a move by Beijing that some consider to be a new round of cultural genocide. Local Mongolians in Inner Mongolia never call themselves Chinese, but Mongolian. They've remained steadfast in their resistance against Beijing's communist regime for decades, and their fight reached a peak over the weekend. People there call their land Southern Mongolia. The protests began after a secret order from Beijing was leaked. It dictated that in all schools, teaching in the Mongolian language would be replaced with using the Chinese language, starting from this September. The U.S.-based Southern Mongolia Human Rights Information Center called this a new round of cultural genocide. From students to teachers, from villages to businessmen, from intellectuals to some government officials and celebrities, people from all walks of life of Southern Mongolia are standing up in an unprecedented level of solidarity. Local authorities are pushing for an early start to the semester, but parents and students across Southern Mongolia are joining the massive school boycott. Schools and classrooms are almost empty. There were students who came to schools, but only to protest. These students are crying, "Our mother tongue is Mongolian. Until death, we are Mongolian." Teacher strikes are also widespread. Ignoring threats from the school authorities that they will lose their jobs, all Mongolian teachers in Shilingola League have gone on strike. Many parents are proposing to homeschool instead of sending their children to Chinese schools. Some retired teachers and even college students are volunteering to teach all subjects in Mongolian. Besides group protests and rallies, signature collection campaigns and solo protests in video, audio, and written format are going viral on social media. Mongolian lawyers are providing guidance online to defend the rights of Mongolian people, with the possibility of filing lawsuits against their new policy. Mongolian people are famous for their singing and dancing. During the protests, certain songs were popular. Citizens gathered together to sing "Let Us Mongolians Be Who We Are." At a concert, singers together with the audience were singing "My Mother Tongue is Mongolian." Videos went viral showing hundreds of herders and thousands of students in traditional Mongolian clothes gathered in separate places, singing "My Mongolia, Step Mongolia." A video shows a little girl crying on the floor. "I don't want to become Chinese. I don't want to learn Chinese." In another short video, a young Mongolian man shows a mock example of how to deal with a school by having their children take sick leave. He pretended to talk to the teacher, saying, "I am not sure when my child will recover, but I expect he will be fine by the time bilingual education is canceled." As the protest gathers momentum, the authorities are intensifying their crackdown. Hundreds of angry parents gathered in front of a school, demanding the school release their children. They had sent their children back to school a day ago without knowing about the new policy. Hundreds of riot police poured to the scene, preventing the parents from accessing the school dormitories. After a standoff lasting hours, parents finally broke through the police barricade and proceeded to collect their children. Students were running out to meet their parents. At another protest, Mongolian parents were met with force by the police. Several parents were beaten and taken into police vehicles. 2 leaders of the protests were taken away. Another 2 were put under house arrest. In another school, a student fell out of a school building and died from the fall. The cause of the accident is so far unknown. A video showing Mongolian schoolgirls protesting triggered a strong reaction online. Some Chinese also expressed their support. One of them wrote, "They didn't kneel down. They deserve to be a descendant of Genghis Khan." Mongolian students are protesting against the cancellation of Mongolian language teaching by the communist bandits. Please support them.
The Czech Republic's second highest ranking official is in Taiwan to promote ties between the two countries. He said that his country will not be deterred by objections from the Chinese Communist Party.
Freedom, truth, and justice. These are your best swords, also your best armor.
Addressing Taiwan's National Chengchi University today, Czech President of the Senate called on Taiwan to defend its freedom and democracy. He said that democratic countries should support each other. The Czech delegate is the second highest ranking official in the Czech Republic and also the most senior one to visit the self-ruled island of Taiwan. The move has drawn the ire of the Chinese regime. Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi said that the Czech official will pay a heavy price for his trip to Taiwan. Czech Deputy Minister summoned the Chinese ambassador in Czech over the comment, with the Czech Foreign Minister saying it has gone too far. Wang was in Europe during the past week, countering growing discontent over China's role in the pandemic and its human rights abuses. In his speech, the Czech official recounted Czechia's history of being betrayed by European countries in the 1938 Munich Agreement. At the time, the UK and France allowed Hitler's invasion of what was Czechoslovakia in order to avoid a war with the Nazis. Yet the Czech official said the appeasement did not bring peace to Europe and eventually dragged the world into World War II. He said the world should have learned from history.
Please believe that we in Czech understand what it means to the Taiwanese people to have the big brother always behind your back. For our shared experience, we understand you and we stand together with you.
Czechia and Taiwan signed 3 memorandums where the 2 states will cooperate on artificial intelligence, medicine, and more. When asked about Czechia's role in China's Belt and Road Initiative, he instead recommended more cooperations between Czech and Taiwanese businesses.
We help you open the doors of Europe, and you can help us open the door of Asia. This is mutually beneficial.
The Czech official is accompanied by a delegation of 89 people, which includes business leaders, lawmakers, and the mayor of Prague, who stopped his city's sister city agreement with Beijing and started one with Taiwan's capital Taipei, despite backlash from China. The group is scheduled to meet with Taiwanese President Tsai Ing-wen on Thursday. The visit fulfilled a promise by the former Czech Senate president. The official died earlier this year, and his widow accused Czechia's pro-Beijing president and the local Chinese embassy of being responsible for his death. The widow said 3 days before Kubera's death, he was invited to the Chinese embassy for dinner, after which the official's health deteriorated quickly. The widow also found 2 letters among Kubera's belongings, one from the Czech president, the other from the Chinese embassy. Both threatened him not to visit Taiwan. The official's death caused a backlash in the Czech Republic against China. The Czech Senate voted 50-1 in May in favor of his successor's diplomatic visit to Taiwan. Penny Zhou, NTD News.
Up next, the Chinese regime introduces new rules for tech exports, including AI. It could give Beijing a say in the sale of social media app TikTok. And a landlord is struggling to make ends meet after her tenant stopped paying rent for months. She's since become homeless. That and more when we return. New restrictions from China could delay the TikTok sale. Shares of TikTok's potential buyers, Microsoft, Oracle, and Walmart, all fell today on the news. Trump advisor Peter Navarro told Fox News it's ironic that China is restricting tech transfers since the regime steals intellectual property.
New rules in China over certain technology exports may mean selling TikTok in the U.S. could need approval from Beijing. This, according to commentary in state media with a Chinese trade expert after the rules were released last Friday. Trump advisor Peter Navarro says China's restriction of this type of tech export is ironic, considering much of China's AI technology came from Google and Microsoft.
So we have, again, a typical situation where China forced technology transfer, grabs it from us, and now they're restricting it. So there is some irony there.
Business professor Frank Xie says China is probably trying to delay the sale until after the November election.
China is trying to postpone this purchase or to delay this negotiation as much as they can.
He says Chinese officials want to make some profits from the sale.
At least Chinese elite, high-level officials, they want to take a cut from the sales as well.
Friday's rule change on tech exports was the first time the Chinese regime revised those controls in over a decade. They restrict the export of artificial intelligence technology. It seems to include the algorithm TikTok uses to recommend the next video to watch. It means TikTok's Chinese owner ByteDance would have to obtain a license to export any restricted technologies to a foreign company. President Trump has ordered TikTok's parent company ByteDance to sell off its U.S. operations. The White House says it's a matter of national security.
The government's eviction moratorium is hurting some mom-and-pop landlords. Reports say a small number of tenants are abusing the freeze on eviction in some states. They're choosing to withhold payment of their rent without claiming virus-related hardship. We spoke with one landlord who finds herself in a more than difficult position.
And it has been a nightmare situation. They've damaged my unit. They punched holes in the wall. They broke down a door. They stopped paying rent in March, and I have not seen a penny since. And because of the eviction moratorium, I cannot do anything. The lease was up in April. They've been squatting in my apartment since April. I have lost my job due to COVID, but I have no protections at all. I've begged them, actually begged them. I told them that I was laid off. I told them my situation, and they just ignored me. So I actually started a petition to look at these loopholes in the eviction moratorium and stop making exceptions for everyone. The problem with the moratorium is that it's a blanket exception for everyone, and this includes tenants that were not paying rent before, It includes tenants that have damaged a unit. The irony of this entire situation is I am now displaced, so I had to move out. So I moved out of my rental property while my tenants are living in my place for free with zero consequences. They've displaced me.
Amazon has won approval to deliver packages by drone. The company plans to use the Federal Aviation Administration approval to further test delivery by drone and work towards the company's dream of 30-minute delivery. Amazon convinced the FAA that it could safely operate the drones. The tech giant submitted details of drone operation and demonstrated its drones for FAA inspectors. Amazon began testing drone delivery in 2013. Last year, a company owned by Google's Alphabet became the first to get FAA approval for commercial drone deliveries. In October, UPS won approval for an entire airline of delivery drones. And Berkshire Hathaway has invested in 5 Japanese trading houses. The company, run by billionaire investor Warren Buffett, says the deals are worth over $6 billion.
Berkshire Hathaway says it acquired stakes of about 5% in Itochu Marubeni, Mitsubishi, Mitsui, and Sumitomo corporations. Buffett said, quote, "I am delighted to have Berkshire Hathaway participate in the future of Japan." A spokesman for one of the companies called the move bright news for not only the company, but also Japan's stock market. Shares of all 5 companies surged by at least 4% in Monday trading after news of the investment broke. Berkshire's investments in Japan are a notable push abroad by the billionaire investor. His favorite stock market value gauge, dubbed the Buffett indicator, recently hit an all-time high of around 183% with respect to U.S. stocks. This suggests American equities may be overvalued and offers slim pickings for bargain hunters like Warren Buffett. The 5 trading houses Berkshire bought into are seen as relatively undervalued. Their price-to-earning ratios in most cases are well below the average for markets in Japan and the United States. Buffett's move into Japan also comes as global investors have so far this year pulled $43 billion from Japanese equities in favor of soaring U.S. tech stocks and others seen as less vulnerable to pandemic-driven turmoil.
Up next, mass demonstrations in Belarus have entered their 4th week. Despite Russian President Putin's support, President Lukashenko is facing more pressure. And a protester even managed to find time to propose during a demonstration. And a boat carrying migrants caught fire off the coast of Italy, leaving at least 3 dead. So far this year, more than 40,000 African migrants have reached Europe by crossing the Mediterranean Sea. More on these after the break.
Violence, war, lies, famine, slaughter, tyranny. The devil's arrangements are present in both the East and the West. Turned religion, the family, politics, the economy, finance, military affairs, education, the academy, the arts, the media, entertainment, all into battlefields. Communist ideology is an ideology of the devil, the initiator of an unrestricted war on mankind. The question is, why are there so many people who harbor romantic fantasies about communism, help the devil spread its lies, even becoming its obedient tools, to deceive, co-opt, coerce, confuse, and so overturn traditional thought, subvert order, create upheaval, and to divide and conquer with the objective of gaining global control?
Over to Europe. More than 40,000 migrants from North Africa have reached Europe by crossing the Mediterranean Sea, and nearly 450 migrants have lost their lives or gone missing. Another tragedy happened on Sunday. NTD UK's Neil Woodrow will bring us more news from Europe.
Thanks. Welcome to the UK newsroom with UK and European news. A boat carrying migrants caught fire off the coast of Italy, leaving at least 3 dead. Emergency services rushed to the southern port of Crotone on Sunday to treat the injured and carry away the dead. The Crotone police said 5 migrants were injured and taken to the hospital. 2 police officers were also hurt in the rescue effort. According to UN data, over 40,000 migrants have arrived in Europe from North Africa by crossing the Mediterranean Sea so far this year. Among them, nearly 450 have died or gone missing during the dangerous journey. And a huge wildfire is raging in Spain's southern Andalusia region, forcing over 3,100 people to evacuate. Public schools and sports centres are now used to house the evacuated residents. The blaze broke out on Thursday in the mountains near the town of Almanas de la Real, 75 miles northwest of the city of Seville. It burned throughout the night, fueled by strong winds. The fire has already scorched over 38 square miles.
The wildfire is devastating the province of Huelva, and the truth is that we are in a situation of great sadness and great concern by the damage, mainly environmental, that we are suffering.
Over 500 people are fighting the fire, along with 16 helicopters and 8 planes. And protesters in Belarus are keeping the pressure high on President Lukashenko as exiled Belarusian opposition leader prepares to address the United Nations Security Council.
Another Sunday and another mass demonstration in Minsk, the capital of Belarus. Waving opposition flags and chanting, "Long live Belarus." Tensions are high, with riot police facing off against lines of protesters.
I came here to express my disagreement with the results of the election, of course, express my solidarity with the detained people and political prisoners. I stand for peace, for Belarus, but not for Lukashenko.
But some clearly feel hopeful. One protester took a chance on a marriage proposal. Opposition leader Svetlana Tikhanovskaya will speak via video link to the UN Security Council on Friday, then address the Council of Europe next week. Since escaping to Lithuania, she has called on Belarusians to continue peaceful demonstrations against President Lukashenko, accused of rigging election to his 6th term in office. Sunday was also Lukashenko's 66th birthday. Russian President Vladimir Putin gave him a birthday call and an invitation to Moscow, demonstrating his support. Meanwhile, 3 Baltic states, Lithuania, Latvia and Estonia, imposed travel bans on Lukashenko and 29 other officials accused of vote rigging and using violence against protesters.
Belarus has revoked accreditation of at least 17 journalists covering the post-election protests, including journalists working for the BBC, the Associated Press, Reuters and Agence France-Presse. Moving on, Moscow police opening a criminal inquiry after anti-Kremlin activist and political blogger was beaten outside his home over the weekend. Yegor Zhukov was hospitalized from the attack. It took place just after he took part in an online talk show discussing the protests in Belarus. Peter Stano, a spokesman for the European Commission, said it looked to be part of what he called a very negative trend on human rights in Russia. Another Russian opposition activist, Alexei Navalny, remains in a medically induced coma after what his supporters say was a poisoning. And the European Union is calling for dialogue with Turkey to end tensions in the Eastern Mediterranean.
The EU is calling on Turkey to end its unilateral activities.
Because only in the dialogue and in negotiations you can pursue the escalation and the path towards stability and lasting solutions.
Last week, the 27 EU foreign ministers decided to show solidarity with EU members Greece and Cyprus. The bloc's foreign policy chief, Josep Borrell, says the EU is ready to sanction Turkish vessels, block their access to EU ports and cut off supplies. Turkey says it will continue to safeguard its rights and interests. Turkey has been exploring for energy in the disputed waters in the Mediterranean, drawing protests from Greece and Cyprus. Greek and Turkish warships shadowing a Turkish survey vessel collided there earlier in August.
And all 193 passengers on a flight are told to self-isolate after 16 test positive for COVID-19. The TUI Airlines flight was from Zante, Greece to Cardiff, UK on August 25th. TUI is now investigating claims of poor adherence to pandemic rules. Rules announced 2 passengers before takeoff. One passenger told The Telegraph many passengers were not wearing masks properly or at all, walking up and down the aisle talking to friends. Greece has had a steep increase in COVID cases recently, recording over half its total cases over the last 4 weeks alone. And Barcelona's captain and superstar player Lionel Messi was a no-show for the team's pre-season virus test as the saga over his contract continues. This follows Messi's shock request last week to leave his career-long club, where he scored more than 600 goals. The 33-year-old's lawyers insist there is a clause in his contract that permits him to leave the club for free. Spanish Soccer League authorities say another team would have to pay a $833 million release clause to get him. The popular star wants to sign with Manchester City, whose offer could include a potential move to New York City in 3 years, according to ESPN. That's all for today. Thanks for watching. Back to New York.
Thanks, Neil. And up next, carved into England's cliffs, the iconic Minack Theatre. The venue reopened in July with reduced capacity. And classic cars from the 60s and 70s turn out in Paris over the weekend. Catch a glimpse of them in the iconic city as they bring onlookers back in time. That and more after the break. Often described as one of the most stunning theatres in the world, the setting of the UK's Minack Theatre only adds to the drama of the performance. Our UK correspondent Jane Werrell found out more about the theatre that was built on the edge of a cliff.
On the cliffs of Cornwall, the sea takes centre stage. The Minack Theatre's dramatic backdrop is sometimes graced with unexpected appearances.
Suddenly you notice the whole audience's attention had disappeared behind you and the dolphins have arrived in the bay.
A theatre exposed to the elements. This is how all theatres once used to be, in the open air. But it's not as old as you might think. It was started by a woman named Rowena Cade, who bought the headland in the 1920s for £100, or about $6,000 today. After getting involved with a local Shakespeare production, she wanted to offer her clifftop garden as a venue and got to work building the theatre by hand with the help of her gardener.
It was very organic, so she just evolved it throughout her entire lifetime, and she worked almost up until when she died. Bless her. And she's created something completely amazing.
Most of the structure is made with concrete mixed with sand from the local beach.
So I'm going to be performing something called Moving Heaven and Earth, which is a one-man performance about how this particular theatre was built by one woman and by her gardener. So I take the role of the gardener.
The first performance here was Shakespeare's The Tempest in 1932. And today the plays still go on, though with some restrictions. Outdoor venues were allowed to reopen from lockdown in July in the UK, operating at reduced capacity. It means more space for the audience, although a different experience for the performers.
If you say something funny in the piece you're performing, there's not an immediate laugh, there's a smile, because you know you don't want to be the only one laughing in your little group. But they're just enjoying it just as much, but you don't notice it in the same way.
But the worries about the weather are the same. It's always a tough judgment call whether to cancel based on the forecast or not.
There's nothing worse than cancelling the show and then the rain completely missing us and going around us, and we're like, we've cancelled the show and we didn't need to.
Today it's gusty, not unusual for this venue, and the staff will decide whether to go ahead with the evening show later on in the afternoon. You might have to hold on to your hat, but the wind does add to the dynamic setting, and it won't take away people's love of open-air theatre.
This is my favourite place in the whole world. To be honest, you could take me anywhere in the world and say, take me back to the Minack, take me back to work, I'd say.
Jane Werrell, NTD News, the Minack Theatre.
And in Paris, classic cars rallied, crossing the capital and reviving memories of times gone by. Our France correspondent David Vives has the story.
It takes a lot of patience and effort to keep these cars. 600 vintage cars, most from the 60s and 70s, gathered on the fresh morning near Paris, preparing to cross the French capital from east to west. A rally where a Ferrari, Bentley, and Citroën 2 CV can go side by side. Here's a DeLorean Back to the Future car, never out of fashion for this garage owner and longtime admirer of the classic American movie.
I always dreamed of having one. When the DeLorean Motor Company went bankrupt, I thought to myself, this is over. But then I saw I could buy one online.
After hundreds of hours of effort, the car is back on the road. Not important if, as some participants said, some of these cars look like a sink with 4 wheels. It's the spirit that counts. Alain Trevor bought these cars from his brother. Crossing Paris is a chance to visit many monuments in one go.
We are in a place that I love very much. Behind me, it's La Fontaine Saint-Michel. We are in the very heart of Paris.
Driving gives him a chance to meet new friends. He says he could admire the landscape for weeks at a time with a friend. And for this Virginia lover who remembers driving along Blue Ridge Mountains, the driving experience is quite different on the two sides of the Atlantic Sea, especially with regard to discipline.
I think American folks are much more correct with the rules of good driving.
Rally organizers say each vehicle participating retraces both personal history and the history of the car itself.
Those cars bring up memories of families, friends. In general, when you meet someone with a vintage car, you meet a happy person.
And that's all it takes to make a happy driver. Reporting by David Vives, NTD News.
A 3-year-old girl was accidentally lifted into the air during a kite festival in Taiwan on Sunday. Thankfully, the kite brought her gently back to the ground in a crowd of surprised onlookers. Local media reports said the little girl suffered only minor cuts after she was thrown about like a rag doll on the tail of a giant kite. The incident happened at the festival about 50 miles west of Taipei. A city government official told local media that a rogue wind blew at the site, causing the tail of the kite to wrap around the waist of the child. Festival activities were suspended as a safety precaution after the incident. And that's all for today's news. Thanks for tuning in. I'm Stephanie Cox.
China's agriculture is already suffering from floods and drought, and now China's southern provinces are facing their worst locust plague in decades. Massive protests broke out over the weekend in Inner Mongolia, this after a leaked secret order from Beijing, which some are calling a cultural genocide.
A high-profile Australian TV anchor, Chen Lei, detained in Beijing. She's long appeared on business programs for China's state-run English news channel CGTN. The news adding fuel to already tense Australia-China relations. China is hoping to get rid of its reliance on Western technology for high-end chips. With one key company coming to a halt, that dream is now hitting a major roadblock. And the Czech Republic's second highest official is in Taiwan on a 6-day visit against the will of China. The Czech official called on Taiwan to defend its freedom and said democratic countries should support each other. Tune in at 9:30 p.m. Eastern Time and tomorrow at 5:30 p.m. Eastern Time to watch the full China in Focus.